Happy New Day to you. The new report says the President of the United States working to conceal what happens in private meetings with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
According to the Washington Post, even high-ranking members of his own administration are kept in the dark. The Post reports it has happened 5 times in 2 years.
Now, in at least one case, he even went so far, they say, as to take notes away from his interpreter, telling him not to talk about what happened, which means there's no detailed record, classified or not, of what was said in these meetings. Here's what the president said when asked if he was a secret Russian agent.
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing.
The question is here, why not just say no? The president did not say that. So according to this Post report, when the administration officials are trying to find out more from these meetings, they go to intelligence sources to track the Kremlin's response. Joining us now to talk about this story, the Washington Post reporter who wrote it, Greg Miller, our national security correspondent. Greg, thanks for being with us. First here, I want you to consider the president's response to your reporting in part, in which he says anybody could have listened to the meeting. That meeting is up for grabs. Is he talking about the 2017 meeting here in Hamburg? And how do you receive that it could have been recorded and that's okay?
I mean, I'm not quite sure what he's saying there. Anybody could have listened. I mean, in fact, there were people on his staff who wanted to be present to listen to that meeting who were not allowed to, both in Hamburg and Helsinki. And I mean, these are meetings that he's having with the Russian president in secure locations, swept for intelligence, for bugs and other things. There really is no meaningful prospect, if they're doing their jobs right, that these were recorded by foreign intelligence services.
Now, I was reading the president's allies were defending the president, saying that he believes his ability to establish a rapport with Putin is hindered by the presence of his subordinates and perhaps fear of leaks. We know the White House has been plagued with leaks since the president took office. Most White Houses are to some degree, but fair concern, or is there a way around this?
I mean, it has been a concern from the outset for this president, and part of it, I think, stems from him, right? I mean, he has shown a lot of disdain for people who work for him. He lashes out at almost everybody who leaves. He doesn't engender much loyalty among his aides because they all know that they could be dismissed with an insulting tweet on any given day. So, I mean, I think that's a factor in why there has been so much leaking in this White House, but it's also because there's been so much really eye-opening or eyebrow-raising behavior.
But not a fair enough argument to make for not having people in these meetings with him and documenting it as it should be.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, as the story says, I mean, this is unlike anything modern we've seen from any modern president. I mean, if you go back to Clinton, Obama, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, their meetings with their Russian counterparts involved senior aides, often multiple aides, taking detailed notes. In fact, you can go through the Clinton archive and read almost verbatim transcripts of his meetings with Boris Yeltsin. Those just don't exist for Donald Trump because he's excluding people from in his own White House from seeing what's happening.
You know, I want to take a step back. It just really is, Greg, a surreal image to think of the President of the United States calling over his interpreter and saying, hand me your notes, and don't tell anybody about what you heard here. The president says that his meetings with Putin are not unlike his meetings with Abe of Japan, with Modi of India. Is there any indication from your sources that he is as territorial over notes and readouts from those meetings as he is about the Putin meetings?
No, I don't think that that's the case. I mean, I think that staff have better access and tend to get better readouts from his interactions with Macron and other leaders around the world. I mean, Trump came into office trying to have this cultivate a relationship with Putin that was puzzling and disconcerting, even to the senior officials who work for him inside the White House. And as the story said, I mean, he's gone to extraordinary lengths to try to protect or conceal his conversations with the Russian leader.
All right, Greg Miller, a fascinating story there in the Washington Post. Thanks so much for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you,
Thank
Greg.
you.
Now for the reaction to this latest report from the White House. CNN White House reporter Sarah Westwood with us now. Certainly the White House does have something to say about this morning, Sarah.
That's right, Christy. President Trump and the White House are pushing back aggressively against this Washington Post report last night, with White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders calling this story so outrageously inaccurate, her words, that it didn't warrant a formal response after that Washington Post reporting that suggested there are no detailed records of 5 personal meetings between President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, including, as you mentioned, one instance where an interpreter's notes were confiscated. And President Trump himself weighed in last night, claiming that his conversations with Putin are no different than his conversations with other world leaders. Here's what he had to say about it on Fox News.
I'm not keeping anything under wraps. I couldn't care less. I met with every leader, just about individually. I meet with Modi. I meet with, in Japan, I meet with Abe. I meet with all of them. But nobody says anything. But I meet with Putin and they make a big deal. Anybody could have listened to that meeting. That meeting is open for grabs.
Now, this reporting, of course, underscores the skepticism that has surrounded President Trump's positioning towards Russia since the beginning of his presidency. He's been criticized for what critics have called a deferential tone toward Russia. So the White House certainly has a lot going on the Russia front right now, including this latest reporting, Victor and Christy.
Very true. Sarah Westwood, always appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so let's again set the table here of the times that President Trump has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin, starting July 7th, 2017, with President Trump on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. And that's when the Washington Post says President Trump took the notes of the meeting from his interpreter. During the same trip, the president met with Putin at the Hamburg banquet. The president and the First Lady, Melania Trump, spoke to Putin through Putin's translator. In November 2017, President Trump and Vladimir Putin met briefly at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. That was in Vietnam. And then again, you'll remember the Helsinki Summit for 2 hours behind closed doors, just the two presidents there with their interpreters. That was in July of 2018. The Post reports that several officials were never able to get the reliable readout of that meeting. Then on November 11th, 2018, they reportedly had a good talk at the Paris World War I centenary. And finally, November 30th of last year, an informal conversation on the sideline of the G20 in Buenos Aires. Let's talk about this now and bring in CNN counterterrorism analyst Philip Mudd, former FBI senior intelligence advisor, and CNN security analyst Samantha Vinograd, former advisor to President Obama's national security advisor. Welcome, both of you, back to the show. Phil, I want to start with you. The question is why? Why the one-on-one meetings? Why the confiscation of the notes? Why the guidance to the interpreter? Why get up in 2017, you're sitting next to Abe of Japan, you walk, a few feet down the table to sit with Vladimir Putin for an hour using his interpreter, none of your people with you. What's your working theory here?
There's a couple of things going on here. One, the president has told us the first explanation, which is that he doesn't trust the people around him and that he believes, and he said this publicly, that there's only one person in the U.S. government who makes policy for America, and that's the President of the United States. Forget about the Defense Department, forget about the Department of State. So I could see him saying, I want to meet one-on-one with these people, and I don't want anybody in the room because nobody else in the room is going to make the decision. The second piece I think is more interesting, Victor, and that is, what are you worried about? If the information gets out about a conversation with Putin, for example, that involves Syria, sanctions, that involves Crimea or eastern Ukraine, the only explanation beyond lack of trust that I can come up with why you wouldn't want those notes to come out is that you think somehow people are going to attack you for what you say to an adversary that has interfered in American elections. So I think it's both trust and a concern about what that conversation was. And of course, we don't know because the notes disappeared.
So, Samantha, let's listen to the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates. This was the days after the Helsinki summit in July of 2018. Watch this.
How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. I think as time goes by, and the President has already mentioned some things that happened in that meeting, I think we will learn more. But that is the President's prerogative. If he had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way.
I mean, you almost feel bad from trying to come up with an answer for, I have no idea what happened there. The Kremlin likely has records, at least, of what happened in that meeting, giving them leverage over the president personally, potentially, and certainly geopolitically over the U.S., does it not?
That's exactly right, Victor. There's a standard operating procedure for these bilateral meetings. I helped staff a lot of these, and I helped get the readouts filed appropriately in line with the Presidential Records Act after the fact. Part of the reason why you want to read out your Director of National Intelligence, your Secretary of State, and a restricted group of key cabinet officials is because you want to establish your own narrative. By failing to allow your team in the room, by failing to establish a firm record, again, in line with existing U.S. law of what actually happened, you are ceding the narrative to Russian intelligence, the Russian media, which is controlled by the state, and Vladimir Putin without having any bit of evidence, a foundation for establishing a narrative on your own. And this comes back to the question of, again, of why the President of the United States wanted to do this. If he took the extraordinary step of asking his interpreter to destroy notes from the meeting, he is again aiding and abetting the Russian intelligence services in manipulating the narrative around what happened.
Let me pick up on that point of destruction of evidence here, because Democratic Congressman and potential 2020 candidate for the presidency, Eric Swalwell, tweeted this: "Destruction of evidence is consciousness of guilt. At this point, please show me evidence that Donald Trump is not working for Russia." Samantha, you've been tweeting out and been talking about a word specifically, assets. It seems almost surreal for me to ask this question, but do you believe that the president is a Russian asset?
I believe that the President of the United States either thinks that he's smarter than Vladimir Putin, which shows that he has been manipulated by a trained KGB agent into thinking that they are on equal footing when it comes to manipulation and exploitation, or, based upon what we learned last night, there is something that Vladimir Putin has over him. And under either scenario, it is extraordinarily clear that Vladimir Putin and Russian intelligence is able to manipulate the President of the United States, and that he's compromised in some way, whether willingly or unwittingly.
Sam. Well, let me stay with Phil for this, because I asked Sam a couple of questions there. Phil, there is this meeting that was supposed to happen, the second summit between President Trump and President Putin. It was scheduled to happen in the fall of 2018. It was postponed until after the midterms, supposed to happen now in 2019. Do you expect the New York Times reporting that we saw yesterday about the FBI investigating if whether the president was working for Russia, and now this Washington Post reporting, the scrutiny decreases the likelihood of that, or the likelihood that the president will go into these meetings as he has in the past without some of his subordinates, or then making sure his interpreter doesn't share what happened in the meeting?
Boy, you're asking me to read the president's psychology. I'll take a shot at that, Victor.
Try it for me,
I think
Phil.
these
Try.
reports actually. It's Sunday morning at 7. I'm going to give it a shot. I think the stories actually increase the likelihood that the president, A, presses forward with a meeting, and B, continues the practices he's used before about meeting privately. For the simple reason, as Samantha said, I think she nailed it, the president thinks he's smarter than everybody else. Every time he looks at these media reports, he also thinks he has an opportunity to show his supporters, those media people, they don't know what they're talking about. I do what I want. I represent you, not them. I think the media reports encourage him to say they will never, that is, people like the New York Times and the Washington Post, persuade me how to act. I have a better solution for things like Iran, North Korea, and Russia, and I'm going to go ahead with the meeting with Putin. I think he'll act the same way. He's 72 years old or 73. He's not going to change now. I'm 57, and I can't change, Victor.
I'm 37, and I probably won't change my time.
Can I just add one quick point, though? I'm going to disagree with Phil, only because I do think that there is a legal aspect to whether the president meets one-on-one with Vladimir Putin anymore. We know from the reporting on Friday that the FBI had entered into a criminal and a counterintelligence investigation into the president. If the president knowingly puts himself in the room with Vladimir Putin again, fails to read out his team again on what happened, you have to imagine that Bob Mueller is going to be looking into the intent and motivations behind those actions, so it's a slightly different playing field than before Helsinki.
Samantha Vinograd, Phil Mudd, thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mike. I'm the creator of Mox News. And for the last 15 years, I have been telling you that as long as I have the support of the community that I serve, Mox News will post videos forever. And that's the truth. As long as I have your support, no one could ever make me stop. unfortunately, currently, less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% of Mox News viewers ever donate, tip, or contribute anything back. Again, let me make that really clear. Much less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% ever give anything back. And to those of you who have donated to Mox News, I want to thank you so much, because it's because of your generosity that we have been able to bring attention to important videos that millions and millions of eyes would have never seen. And I think that that's an amazing thing that we've been able to make happen together. And I can't thank you enough for helping me make that happen. So it's not too late. If you'd like to see Mox News covering the 2020 presidential election, if you can't imagine the 2020 presidential election without Mox News, please, there's still time. You can make a difference. It's easy to make a contribution, donation, or tip. You can go to moxnews.com, or in the text body of this video, there are clickable links to the Patreon page or to the PayPal page. And again, it should take less than 2 minutes to make a donation, and your donation can make a big difference. So I thank you all. Stay cool. One of these days this war is going to end, and it would be awesome if Mox News could be there to celebrate that day with you.